Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tristan Mohabir from the Communications Network. I am filling in for Sean Gibbons, who you usually see doing these things. I'm also joined by my colleagues behind the scenes, Kareem Alston, who's helping me run the slides, and Carrie Klein, who will be dropping some links in the chat that you all will see shortly. Sorry, we're a little bit delayed, but let's get started. Our usual way to begin these is a two-word check-in. So drop your name, where you're tuning in from, and how you're doing in 2 words into the chat. And while you all are doing that, we have a few announcements we will run through before we get started with the presentation today. First up is Slack. There are literally thousands of us in there. If you're a network member, you get to connect with other folks, ask questions, get support, all that good stuff. So if you're not in there and you think you should be, shoot an email to info@comnetwork.org and we will get you set up. Circles, a lot of you are familiar with this. So we have groups organized around issues, jobs, identities. It's just another way for folks to connect with each other and get that community connection, learning, help, all that good stuff. And if you're in Slack, you will have seen that we have a few new circles that will be coming online soon. So stay tuned for that. That's coming down the road later this year, hopefully. ComNetwork Local, we're building community where you live and work in your backyard. We've got over a dozen groups across the country now. You don't have to be a member to participate in these. It's free for all to show up to. We're trying to focus on in-person events. And so in that vein, we have a few things coming up to flag for you all. Next slide, please, Kareem. Detroit is hosting a summer happy hour today. So our friends there, you can learn more with the link. comnetwork.org/locals has all of our groups and the events coming up. LA is doing a really cool event, habitat restoration, this weekend. So that sounds like a really cool event. New York, AI and communications, hot topic, obviously. So that's next week, June 26th. And our friends in Atlanta, this was rescheduled from earlier this month. New date, that is also next week, June 27th is the new date for that one. Some other stuff to highlight for you. So ComNet 24, Kansas City this year, it's going to be really amazing. We're really excited about the programming we have, and you can find all of that information and more at comnet24.org. A couple of our keynotes this year who we announced so far, Heather McGee and Ebony Reed, are going to be fantastic. You can stay tuned for the agenda, learning labs, poster sessions, all that stuff on the ComNet site, and see what else we have coming up soon. You will also have probably gotten an email about this if you're on our email list. We are doing our second Pulse poll. So this one is all about how folks are using generative AI in their communications work, or if they are at all. So the deadline to respond by that, I believe, is next Wednesday. Oh yeah, there it is, Wednesday, June 27th. Once we have a chance to aggregate all the data and responses, we will share that back out with everybody so you can see how you and your org stack up. So with that, it is my pleasure to announce our speakers today, Katie Borum, Bethany Hall, Zeba Rahman, and Michael Crawford. We're going to be talking about something that we probably don't talk about enough in the social change space, and that's how to use comedy to make social change happen. So I think for my 2-word check-in, it's actually going to be 3 words, but I'm ready to laugh today. So with that, oh, another shout out. Sorry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Kenya, our amazing interpreter. So she is going to be doing ASL interpretation for us. We also have the option to do captioning if you'd like to do that. You can enable that in the Zoom bottom panel, I believe. For Q&A, please submit your questions in the Q&A function, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll go back and get to those. And at the very end, we'll have unstructured office hours. So we'll jump to a different Zoom link for that. And with that, I will hand it over to Michael, I believe.
Thanks, Tristan. So hi, everybody. I am Michael Crawford. I am a vice president at Spitfire Strategies, and we are so excited to have you join us today to talk about how to use comedy for social change. So first off, I want to thank Tristan for kicking everything off, and I want to give a special shout out to Kenya for interpreting for us, which is wonderful, and she's amazing. So we're going to get started in a moment. We have a couple of different speakers who are going to share things with you, including the history history of the intersection between comedy and social change, some really hot tips on how you can integrate comedy into your work. And we're going to talk about a few examples, and we're going to talk about why funders should be supportive of this kind of work, especially with the scale of the change that we need to make. We got to use all the tools at our disposal. So to start off, we're going to share with you a video that is going to be really, really fun. It's going to be a little bit different, so be prepared to laugh, but also know this is not your usual set of 17 different data points. And then Katie Borum is going, and Bethany Hall are going to talk to us on the flip side of the video about all the amazing work that they have done. And so with that, hit play on the video.
Hey. Who would do that? Let me think. Shut up and let me go. Hey! Check the vibe. Turn it on
now. Sorry, Harriet. Please don't look at me like that.
The climate crisis. All right, so here's a super abridged history of Norfolk. When the king started filling rivers with dirt, the Powhatan people who'd lived there for a long time and had at least a basic grasp of physics said, hey, don't fill in the creeks and rivers. The water is going to find a way to flow in its natural path. And the king said, nah, I got this. And the Powhatan people said, are you sure? And the king said, ooh, I can't understand your mystical native language. And the Powhatan said, dude, we're speaking English. And the king said, sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of all this colonialism. LOL. Ka-ching!
I want to tell you just a report from these white climate crisis rooms what they worry about. Straws, sea turtles, black people. It's not a good order.
Couple things off top racism. You're old and played out.
You're watching You're Welcome America, the show that celebrates Black and Native cultures, or disappoints them, depending on who you are.
Anti-racist means you acknowledge white privilege. Anti-racist thinks white privilege is a sparkling wine.
The myth of the model minority shit ain't gonna cut it, Jack.
Sorry I'm late, guys. Some idiot spilled water all over the hallway. What are you doing here in one person per room?
Fight me for it, bitch. I'm Bengali.
I'm Persian and they think we're both Mexican, so get the fuck out.
Hi, excuse me, do you work here?
No, I don't. Sorry. Why did I say sorry? I don't work here. I've never worked here. I've never worked at a convenience store in my life. What do I look like? I work at a convenience store. Why these bitches always asking me this shit? I can't even go get no damn edge control.
Hi, where can I find tampons? But they're like a cup. Oh, I'm sorry, do you work here?
No.
Please understand that I'm also wrestling with my own racism and prejudices that I unknowingly held, because that is how systemic stuff works.
Wow. Did you know that in 26 states it's illegal to separate puppies from their mothers before they're 8 weeks old? Yeah, and that same decency isn't granted to human mothers. I mean, the only two countries that don't require paid time off for new mothers are the US and Papua New Guinea.
Always be closing. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Giannis, you got that? Okay, go write down the alphabet. Closing these deals. Not on the wall. Giannis, stop writing on the wall. Tell me to write it down. Nice writing on the wall, Giannis. Good book.
Maternity leave. Just got 2 weeks. Weak ass paid leave. Make my caregiving cheap. What a dream, not a scheme. If we all have more paid leave, while we cook, while we clean, while we can't take family. Chores in this house.
You know that feeling? That itch you can't scratch. Those thoughts that have been running through your head all day. Then you should try therapy.
Kinky.
Yeah, it's just my stomach. Yes, I have heard of the Flintstones vitamins.
Not feeling heard? Well, then you should try prescription strength. It be like that sometimes.
Now what you need to do is tell your friends about this. That is, If you had friends. Ooh.
Okay, hi everyone. I hope that was fun for you. That was a little preview of the work, some of the work that we do at the Center for Media and Social Impact. So how this is going to go, I'm going to introduce myself. Oh, Michael, were you going to introduce me, or am I introducing myself?
Hi, everybody. I'd like to introduce Katie Borum.
Perfect. That was great. That was perfect. It was like both of us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Center for Media and Social Impact and our journey in research and really building models to actually make comedy and social justice work. But briefly, even though Michael did just say my name, my name is Katie Borum, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Social Impact, which is a creative innovation lab and research center based at American University, where I'm also a professor. I have a very, very long history. I'm like 137 years old in media and social change and entertainment. And I want to tell you first a little bit about the journey to doing research around comedy and human rights and why that matters, what we actually know from research, and why it is that we then have become very dedicated to leveraging comedy for social change, because we feel like it's been a little bit neglected in the philanthropic and social good space. I'm going to introduce my colleague Bethany Hall after I talk. What you just saw was a little bit from our initiative called Good Laugh, which is kind of our brand under which a lot of our really intentional work happens between comedy and social justice activists. So briefly, okay, I have 15 minutes. Let's see if I can do it. I wanted to tell you all a little bit about the journey toward doing this work, because I actually think it's very relevant to a lot of you on this call. I recognize some names of some folks. I'm very familiar with the communication for social change space, having been a former agency person and, you know, a number of other experiences. But I have been doing work at the intersection of entertainment and communication and social change for a really long time. And as part of that work, I was a producer for the legendary Norman Lear, and who was really known as kind of one of the progenitors in this country of the idea that we can take serious public affairs issues like wicked problems that affect us and incorporate them into comedy and actually leverage that work for us to have real conversations with one another. So I've been doing this work for quite a while in documentary and other, you know, communication strategy and the Norman Lear work. But it occurred to me that actually, when you looked carefully about 10, 12 years ago at the full landscape of work that was happening around public engagement with social challenges, from reproductive rights to environmental justice to, you know, I worked on HIV a long time ago. It occurred to me that comedy was generally not present in that kind of public engagement strategy work. And I thought instinctively, perhaps based on the fact that I'm a funny person, and maybe also based on the Norman Lear experience, it occurred to me that this was a mistake, that we were actually leaving a lot of really good strategy on the table by being a little bit, maybe not knowing enough about how comedy works, and even maybe being a little afraid of comedy. And so if any of you saw any piece of that video and thought you were offended by a joke, I would ask you, what's more offensive, the social issue that it's ridiculing or the joke? And of course, there is a real answer to that, and it's not the joke. So about 10 years ago, at the Center for Media and Social Impact, I got our first grant to study intentionally this question: how is it that comedy actually affects us as audiences when we experience civic, social, and public health issues through comedy, real entertainment, actual funny comedy? How are we influenced by audiences? And what are sort of the cultural effects? So it occurred to me, as someone who had been doing this kind of work for a long time, that if we actually did not intentionally answer those questions, we would be stuck in this constant cycle of like, how do we know it works? What works? We're afraid of it. So I created a rather aggressive research agenda to really answer that question. So long story short, I've written 2 books on this topic. One is co-authored with my colleague Lauren Feldman, called A Comedian and an Activist Walk into a Bar: The Serious Role of Comedy in Social justice from 2020, and then a newer book published last year called The Revolution Will Be Hilarious, Comedy for Social Change and Civic Power, and a lot of peer-reviewed journal articles and things like that. So I wanted to start by saying this research is actually quite serious, even though the work that we do is quite fun. I think as good communication for social change people, we're aware that you should always kind of hide the broccoli a little bit. And so no one really cares that the research is peer-reviewed, except that I can say at the top of this kind of conversation, what we know about comedy has actually been facilitated very rigorously on our end. Okay, so beginning in 2014, if the question was, what do we know across disciplines about how comedy actually facilitates our thinking and persuasion, and sometimes even our intended actions around civic, social, and public health issues? So the very first step, as many of you would probably already know if you do research, you should always start with what others have already done. So a really fun fact about comedy is that almost every discipline of scholarship actually has studied comedy. This is actually one of the rare topics that gets studied by a lot of different groups. So comedy research is found in neuroscience, public health, psychology, sociology, my field's communication and media studies, literature, brain science, it goes on and on. But it's really difficult if you're not a scholar to look across those disciplines and even know where to look to find out what are the commonalities. Where do we actually all agree? Yes, theology, I happen to just see that. Yes, every discipline studies comedy, very exciting. So our research really combines a synthesis across disciplines of, across those areas to see what is it that we know about comedy's effects. It also includes our original research, again, 2 books, there's a lot of stuff in there about what it is that we know about comedy for social change. So the reason that I think this is so important to think about now is because we are in what we talk about, at least in my field, as the participatory culture age. Henry Jenkins writes about this as what happens when a generation of young people, who I'm quoting now directly, who've grown up with more opportunities to meaningfully participate in culture, turn their voice to struggles for social justice and political change. And so this kind of practice of participatory culture and participatory politics is all of the stuff that we think of as user-generated material. But we know from plenty of research about activism and social justice movements in the digital age that all of that work really contributes to shaping public opinion, contributes to shaping policy, what we generally think of as heroes and villains and problems worth solving. So for us, it's a very exciting time to know what we know about comedy, because we're not just trying to produce comedy that lives on the biggest marketplace stage, i.e. Hollywood-produced material, although that is also great, but the kind of material that lives and explodes on social media, across channels. All of that work matters. So briefly, putting this work into that context, I think, is really important. So I want to highlight for you all, there's so much work that I could talk about, but I'm trying to do this in 12 minutes. I want to give you a highlight across a decade of this work now of serious research and experimentation, synthesizing across disciplines, as I mentioned. What we know, what are kind of the major factors, the major effects of comedy as social change? What are the major audience influences that really exist across disciplines in our own research? So I want to talk to you about 5 of those. And then I want to introduce just very briefly the kind of programs that we've created that actually intentionally work with comedians. Okay, so 5 audience influences of social change. So in other words, how does comedy affect us as audiences when we experience civic, social, and public health issues through humor? One is the entry into taboo topics. This is a really, really huge one. And this, again, there's so much, there are many disparate pieces of research that one could look at, but just examples of this kind of idea. One piece of research that has always struck me as particularly meaningful in this is some public health research about HIV in South Africa. South Africa continues to have a high rate of infection. It is going down from HIV, which means disproportionately Oh, you know what? I just realized I'm on an audience of people that probably already know these statistics because we're social change people. But in that case, I came across research that showed that humor was one of the only ways that really people could talk about HIV prevention strategies, because it had become actually such a painful topic, because so many people knew someone that had passed, and it was really difficult. So entry into taboo topics, one of comedy's superhero skills. Okay. The second one is hope and optimism as motivating emotions. There is a lot that we can say about what motivates us to take action. And I am not an anger and rage researcher. I know there are a lot of people who actually do research on that, so I actually don't mean that in a funny way. But I think that hope and optimism are often overlooked. We know from our own comedy research and others that when we provoke and inspire feelings of hope and optimism, even about a dire topic, people are more likely to be predisposed to actually have an attitude shift and to feel some kind of efficacy, some kind of sense that they can make a difference. Comedy is also number 3. Comedy can provide a gateway to more serious information over time. Some interesting research that suggests that when we encounter serious civic complicated issues through comedy, we are able to attend to that issue a little more closely over time in serious forms of information, journalism, etc. Because comedy does, among other things, I don't want to be reductive, comedy does lots of things, but you cannot tell a funny joke if you have not reduced something to the barest essence of what makes it funny. So what that actually means, social change people, is that we're doing a little bit of translating already through comedy. So if something is already so technocratic and difficult to understand that you feel like you're never going to get it if you're not an expert, comedy breaks it down. You get it just enough to maybe pay attention a little bit closer. We love that one. Number 4. We believe that comedy has a bit of a memorable sleeper effect. If those of you who may know that term from psychology, the idea that certain messages stay with us over time and we can recall them. We actually recall information when it comes in a joke structure because we've been entertained. This should not feel like a giant revelatory piece of information to anyone that works in communication, because we all know this is why Super Bowl ads are so funny, because marketing people figured that out a long time ago. And when it comes to persuasion, there are a couple of different ways that we can be persuaded through messages. One is through a kind of central route where we are thinking about the merits of a message. It's like a cognitive route of persuasion. And a different route is through our emotional selves, a heuristic route where we're, a little bit more guided by our affect, what we like. Do we like the messenger? Are we amused? And often the persuasion through comedy, like thinking carefully about a message, comes through the entertainment value and the positive emotion that comedy can actually generate. So what's exciting about this one, and one of the sort of too long didn't read highlights that we say when we talk about this one, is this actually doesn't work if the comedy is not really good. And so if the comedy is just mildly funny, like slightly better than usual messaging, it's actually not the same thing as comedy. It's just like slightly less boring messages. So the entertainment value actually matters quite a bit. We published a really big study in one of the top journals in our field where one of the major findings was how funny and entertaining people thought the comedy was. That was directly correlated to their willingness to take some kind of action. So entertainment value, positive emotions, very exciting. Okay, so let me come very close to wrapping up, but I just want to say another piece of this, it's not just audience influence. I would never want us to come away from a talk like this, especially from us at the Center for Media and Social Impact, thinking that we're following a magic bullet approach, right? Like the idea that you receive a message and everything happens to you and it's all over. Of course, that is not how it works, right? Comedy and culture and entertainment exists as part of this massive cultural fabric. So the reason that the comedy really passes through the culture also is because we're more likely to share comedy. The comedy is therefore amplifying the message because we can share it. I don't know how many of you all saw the funny, if you remember the funny government PSAs for COVID during the early days of COVID, which were like ridiculous send-ups of government PSAs that kind of united us all in terrible bureaucratic messaging, but they were really funny and you actually learned some stuff, right? So the pass along value. So one thing that I wanted to say before I pass it on to my colleague Bethany Hall is that as part of both of the books that I wrote about comedy and human rights, I interviewed a lot of organizations that actually did experiment with comedy to say, if you're doing issues like gun violence, like reproductive health, like immigrant rights issues, these are really hard, complicated, policy-focused, sad issues. Why are you turning to comedy, right? And I want to just give you a few reasons why. What I heard over and over again in this research. One was that people said they felt like comedy really allowed them to humanize those who are kind of othered in the mainstay of media representation, to show people what their flaws and their, our sort of common human, terribleness or heroics. Comedy can mobilize a base. One group in particular said, our issue is one of the most painful issues for people to deal with. And if you think about how we have to motivate people consistently to lean into our issue, if we don't use comedy sometimes to motivate our base, not just get to people that aren't with us, but to motivate our base, we are going to fatigue out of doing this work. Comedy, of course, can attract new supporters and provides a need for optimism. So what we have done at the Center for Media and Social Impact, right? So satisfied with knowing that there's a lot to know and think and feel great about with real social science and scientific evidence about why humor and comedic forms of public engagement are so important. We at CMSI are never content with the idea of just doing research to know some answers to things, because we are easily bored. That would be boring to us. And so what we've done over the last 6 years or so, based on all of that research and more, is to build intentional models that really put into practice what would it look like if we actually brought professional comedy people, performers, writers, and performers, together with social change communication people and social justice leaders. What would it look like if we actually trained those constituencies on how to actually work together effectively, and what kind of comedy might they co-create together? So that's our big Good Laugh program. Bethany's going to talk about that. And I'll mention item number 2. Our other big question was, oh my gosh, if we know what we know about how important it is for comedy to particularly spotlight voices of people who are traditionally and historically and consistently dehumanized and marginalized in media coverage, women, people of color, disability community, et cetera, what would it look like if we actually explicitly resourced those amazing comedians and allowed their voices to become bigger and created real community with one another? That is our program that we run with Moore & Associates called the Yes and Laughter Lab. Zeba Rahman is a very proud funder of that work, and we love it. It has become 6 years later an incredible community of hundreds of comedians. And by the way, if those of you all are watching this and thinking, I must work with comedians now, first of all, good on us. Second of all, if you want to find those comedians, we have something called Y'all Community, which is a searchable database where you can find comedians that deal with all kinds of issues. And we have vetted them for you, which means if they're in our database, they are very funny and talented and experienced. So now it is my great pleasure. I'm sure I went over time because that always happens. I would like to turn the floor over to my friend and colleague, Bethany Hall, who's the Creative Director of Comedy Initiatives at the Center for Media and Social Impact, also the co-founder and co-executive producer of Good Laugh with me. And she is a comedian because we felt like that was important to always have a comedian's voice in the programs that we create. And she's going to give her hot tips on how to work with comedians effectively and how to not kill their joy so that their comedy is not funny. Bethany.
Thank you, Katie. I always love hearing your recap. I'm like, oh yeah, our work matters. In addition to the programs Katie mentioned, I just wanted to shout out a couple of things we've done since that video. So this summer, we're going on tour with a show that we call The Great American Punchline, and we're intentionally hitting small and medium-sized cities that we call like purple areas. So there's a good balance between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives, liberals. So that's really exciting. We premiered the show at the Kennedy Center in the fall. We are also the proud co-creators of the Comedy Climate Cohort, which we do with Generation 180. And I see some of our fellows in the audience, so hello. Through CMSI, we are also actively making a podcast with the Peabody Awards that is Comedy Forward. We're really proud of it. And so we've done like a whole slew of a lot of really cool things. And with that, I wanted to give you what I love to call sizzling hot tips on how we've done it. I really wanted to make like a party invite for you guys, but now I'm just going to explain this to you like I explain my children's birthday parties to people. It's like I'll just tell you about it and then see who shows up. But it is in the form of an invitation. So the who, if you are making professional content, you need professional comedians. And with that, and Katie already said this, but with that, I'm just saying you need to pay them professional comedian rates like you would a graphic designer. You know, like comedians bring a lot of value to the space and they need it to be supported with a lot of value. In most of our spaces, we work with like 3 to 9 comedians. I really suggest working with more than one at a time, just because it's a way for people to bounce their ideas off of them to yes and. I am a huge improv comedy nerd. That's the foundation of all my work. So I really like the idea of bringing comedians together to work with your organization or your mission. So this probably sounds really obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. The comedians you choose, and like Katie said, we have our whole Rolodex, we can help, but they should have a personal connection to the topic, ideally, that we're tackling, right? So if we're talking about elder care, we did a great comedy think tank that tackled paid leave. You should hire the comedians that are in the situation of maybe in the sandwich generation, right? They have an aging parent and they also have children. And so they can use their humor to express their lived experience. Additionally, though, I highly recommend you really knowing who your target audience is and bringing in comedians who know how to reach that audience. I hope that makes sense, but it's kind of 2 different categories of people in my mind. So that's the who. Comedians, they're amazing. Pay them. Okay, what? Literally any topic. I feel like you can do anything with comedy. I feel like you even see it in the tagline of our slogan, laughing in the face of injustice. I have yet to find a subject that we cannot make comedy around. We're not laughing at the subjects, but we can make comedy about anything. And so there you go. Where? I recommend if you, in the most ideal situation, if you can bring your comedians together with the social justice experts in an actual physical space. To me, that's the most valuable way to work and brainstorm and collaborate with people. We've done it over Zoom and it works. And so anything's possible. But I really think that what I like to call like the walk to the bathroom, like those moments sometimes generate the best types of collaboration and stimulate those vulnerable bits that you might not get if you're not together in person. Okay, so when do we bring comedians into our project? Okay, so we do not bring our comedians in on a project to like punch up Mark from IT's jokes. Mark from IT is great, fun to, hang out with every once in a while. He is not the comedian. We have professional comedians. We bring them in at the right time, right? You do not hire Rachel Dratch to do a joke that you thought was funny in your communications room, okay? You hire her to write the jokes about the topic you want her to perform later. So in my mind, there are two places. Thank you, Katie. Yes. There are two places where it's appropriate to bring comedians in. One is at the very beginning. Say you're like, I think I want to do comedy. Is that bananas? I'm going to assemble a group of really qualified comedians and find out what they think. You don't even know what you want to make. Bring them in, brainstorm, right? Is it a web series? Is it like a social media campaign? Do you want to create your own comedy tour? If you don't know what you want to make yet, let them help you figure it out, because oh my gosh, our comedians so bright and talented and they can do that. So that's one great place to bring them in right off the bat. Hire them for a couple of days, see what happens. Another place, the only other, in my mind, appropriate place to bring the comedians is say you've decided what you're going to do. You know the structure, you have the skeleton, but you need to put in the meat and the fat, you need the fat and the blood, and you got to get that stuff circulating. Bring the comedians in then. Say, this is the skeleton. Can you draw the rest of this body? And the answer is always yes. Don't start drawing in that body without them though, guys. Let them come in when there's still decisions to be made, and let them influence what you're doing. Okay, why? This is obvious. Katie just talked about it for 15 to 20 minutes. There we go. How? Okay, these are where the sizzling hot tips come in. You're welcome in advance. Number one, before the comedy creative work begins, download them on all of your information, right? Share with them all of the most pertinent information that you have. And it doesn't have to be funny. Comedians aren't only funny. You can just give them the materials and let them absorb it. As a comedian, I can tell you the more source material I have, the more content I have to build humor off of. So keep it coming, give them the information. Also, so I call that like a subject matter brain dump. Give it to them. If you can do it in person and really have a conversation with comedians, I think that's the best way to do it. Two, let them know what your expectations are. So, we're artists, we're procrastinators. Give us deadlines. Tell us what the deliverables are going to be. Is it just a brainstorm, or are we producing something at the end of this? Be very clear about the deadlines. And three, schedule your check-ins. Like, we're going to meet at the end of X day and we would like to see whatever. And probably when you're writing that agenda, sit with a comedian to make sure that it makes sense what the agenda looks like. Okay, hot tip number two. This is not everyone's favorite hot tip, but ooh, is it spicy? Give them privacy. Once the comedians have the information they need, let them work alone and privately with each other. This is their space to toss around a lot of really bad ideas with each other before they figure out what's actually sticking. And I like to say, like, to the left of a really bad idea, something really, really brilliant. But if people are hovering over them or interrupting or trying to get their own idea or joke in, it's never going to evolve to that point. So trust that these are professionals because you listen to the who of this all, and let them sort it out on their own, just knowing when the check-ins happen. And also you have the check-ins coming up, right? So you know that you might not know what's exactly happening in the room, and it might seem like they're napping on the table, but actually they're working. So let them work and figure it all out. Okay, number three, be bold and say yes. Comedy is not apologetic. Comedy is bold. So if you want to generate the best content possible, we need to just lean into the boldness of it. We need to let Walter Kelly dance in a WAP video. You know what I mean? Like, that was the funniest paid leave material I've ever seen. Be bold, embrace the comedy of it all. And also, I like to remind people that when you are working with comedians, I think I really encourage you to know that if you position yourself in their court rather than having them in your court, you're going to get a lot better material. So if you allow the creative viewpoints. If you rely on the expert, like you're the expert with the information and they're the expert with the jokes, if everyone really understands how they fit into this equation, it's going to be a way more powerful experience and funnier. And number 3, let it be hilarious. Do not water down great jokes. And I know this one gets hard sometimes because if you say, oh, I really wanted to make these 5 great points and this video only hits on 2 of them, is it still worth being made? Yes, because if we can hit those 2 points to a point that is making people laugh and it's really entertaining folks, then we have messaged 2 amazing points to people that they would not have seen in the watered down 5-point version. Those are my sizzling hot tip party invite messages. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you, Bethany. I think it is my job to now toss it over to Michael Crawford from Spitfire to give a few more examples of comedy leverage for social justice.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, for tossing it over to me. I've caught it. And also thank you to you and Bethany for all of the great tips and advice and history that you have shared thus far. So I'm going to just be upfront with folks. I am going to speed through this, taking note of time. So if we could, Kareem, please go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about 3 quick examples. And this one is super familiar to Bethany and Katie because they worked on this. So Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave was a project that they did with Hip Hop Caucus, which is an amazing organization that uses hip hop to engage younger people, especially younger people of color, around social justice issues. So they did a stand-up comedy show with 4 Black millennial comedians who were tasked with the really hard goal of making the climate crisis funny. And as Bethany noted, there is not anything that cannot be made funny, and Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave is really funny. And so what they did was they filmed this comedy show in a Black public housing community that was being redeveloped because of climate flooding, sea level rise, and a legacy of racist urban policies. So they went to the source of where the problem was with this batch of comedians, made it funny. If you watch the video, people are actually laughing as they're learning more about the climate crisis and how it's impacting Black and other underestimated communities. It is wonderful and super funny. Go to the next slide, please, Kareem. And so here's a different kind of example of how humor can be integrated into making social change. So We're Here is a reality series on HBO that features drag queens going to small towns to engage citizens there in becoming drag queens for a day, as a way of breaking down all of the animosity, the hatred, the lack of familiarity around drag queens and other queer folks. Because if you think about it for a moment, we're in this period where there's a lot of hostility towards queer people generally. There is a lot of hostility towards trans people specifically. And there have been a lot of legislative attempts to ban drag queens who are simply spreading light and joy in the world. And so this series, which is a little different from probably what a nonprofit organization would do, was a way of shining the light on drag queens, how they bring joy and happiness into the world, and helping to break down some of those barriers that currently exist. Next slide, please. And then the final example I'll share is Black Twitter. We're all likely, hopefully, familiar with the power and the impact of Black Twitter. And again, it's not something that a nonprofit organization can actually control, create, or run, but it was organically created by Black Twitter users doing what Black folks often do, where we make fun and joy and light out of really serious topics. If you're remotely familiar with Black people in the Black community, you may hear us joke sometime that we are so unserious. And what we mean by that is not that we don't take things seriously, but we have a propensity of being able to take even the most serious issue and making light and humor and fun out of it, even as we're helping to create social change. And there's a Black Twitter documentary that's currently on Hulu that talks about some of the work of the broader community that is Black Twitter, including the hashtags were created around the Oscars So White, which saw some movement in diversity in the Academy, although just like with everything else that occurred during the racial reckoning, they're starting to pull back, and the Oscars is becoming so white again. Thanksgiving Clap Back, which is hilarious and super fun. And then, of course, the iconic Black Girls Are Magic. And in addition to, the humor, the joy, the jokes, the memes, etc., that Black Twitter has created, it's also helped to focus serious attention on, for example, the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson and the murder of George Floyd. And so when we think about Black Twitter, which is a little bit different now that Twitter is under a different ownership. It is still continues to be a powerful force. And if you remember about a year ago, August 5th is going to be the actually the anniversary of the Alabama Brawl. So be prepared for lots of humor from Black folks then. After that videos start to surface of that, we saw examples like a Twitter account from the perspective of the chair that was used in the brawl. You saw videos of people who were at the Home Depot in the aisles exercising with chairs as a way of both getting in their fitness and preparing to defend Black folks. And I know that I spread through that really, really quickly, but I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of how expansive we can think about humor, comedy, and how it engages with social change. And with that, I want to kick it over to Zeba Rahman, who's going to talk in amazing ways about why her foundation is supporting this work.
Thank you, Michael. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. I'm such a big fan of comedy in so many different forms, and I'm very fortunate to work for a foundation whose overall mission, is to build a more creative, more equitable, more sustainable future by investing in artists and the performing arts, the environment, medical research, and child well-being to create greater understanding across diverse communities. So that's our overall mission. And then the program that I look after, called the Building Bridges program, is focused on elevating U.S. Muslim stories with the goal of increasing mutual understanding and well-being amongst diverse populations for the benefit of more inclusive and more resilient communities. And we do so by using or really anchoring our grant making in the strategic use of arts and media to help provide a more effective social prescription for achieving this vision. So very early on, I would say about a decade ago, which was early in my tenure in philanthropy, we began looking into how we could bring in comedians and comedy platforms into our investment portfolio. And what that did was it served as a really fabulous entry into a world that I learned a lot more about. Of course, as a consumer of comedy, I knew about comedy, but this was really looking at it from an investment in the well-being of our communities across the board. And what we discovered is how effective comedy is when you can sit side by side to share a laugh and laugh at a fundamental truth, an issue in our society that comedians put forward in full force and completely openly across the board in their riffs, in their shows, and how it really brings together people from all sides to share in that laugh. And our medical research colleagues would back me up. I think if I say that even the NIH has studies proving that laughter can reduce cortisol, the stress hormones, and increase dopamine and serotonin, the hormones that make us feel happy and have a sense of well-being. So it's medically proven to be really effective. It's socially proven to really help move the needle by putting forward truths in such a way that they're infectious. We can't help but laugh along and at the same time take in the message. So it's a strategic message, precision directed at the room, and at the same time, just infecting us in such a way that it goes viral inside us and across the board with the audience, and then we retell these stories. So it has a really powerful, disruptive effect on anybody who listened to the messages. So that therein began this journey to start investing more and more in comedians and comedic platforms. And particularly Katie mentioned this, that early on in her opening remarks, that in philanthropy, there has been something of a hesitation and a neglect of including comedy in portfolios, because there's this I think quite old story that art forms, the classical art forms of theater and music and dance, and somehow comedy is on the baby table. But in fact, we believe that comedy is very much on the grown-up table and is a beautiful disruptor and a beautiful way to really intervene in very tense situations. So very often we have found in our investments that comedy is the glue that binds communities together and allows them to continue the conversation no matter how uncomfortable later on. It gives all of us a medium and a means to enter into conversations that we would normally shy away from. So we have been longtime supporters of the Yes and Laughter Lab that Katie, Bethany, and their consultant and their co-conspirator, I should say, Mick Moore, have conceived and continue to run. They have nurtured comedians, they have built a network of comedians, and it's really exciting to see where they've taken the whole program. It's highly effective. I'm going to stop talking because I see we're very close to time, and happy to turn it over to all of you from here and just reiterate our belief that storytelling through comedy is one of the most effective means to create a bond across communities so that we can cooperate together for our mutual well-being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zeba. I always like listening to what Zeba has to say. I do. What was meaningful for us when we started to do this research and to really do public talks about it and to try to build constituencies around the idea that comedy should be taken seriously for human rights work, it took a couple of strong voices like Zeba's to say, yes, we believe you and we will help support that. And I just want to say that in our work specifically, we had a couple of early grants that were largely exploratory, and it was game-changing to be able to work in that way. It allowed us to really create programs from scratch. So we're really grateful. I think my only job here is to wrap us up with any final words. I don't really have final words other than to say, we love the work that you do, communication people and social change. We really believe in this. All of us work in this sector for a reason. We feel great purpose and mission in the work that we do. And we would just really invite you to consider leveraging comedy for your work. And then if you do, don't be afraid of the comedians, because as Bethany mentioned, when they can actually have some creative freedom in the same way you would give creative freedom to a composer, to a playwright, to a documentary filmmaker, when you offer some creative freedom to comedians, they will often come up with ideas that are more innovative and funny and creative than things that you would impose on them. So that's our kind of big plea about working with comedy. But we think, you know, obviously we're all united in trying to do serious work, creating a world that's more just and more kind. And we would just encourage you to consider comedy in your toolbox, because as somebody who works with young people as a professor, I think a lot of our old methods are not reaching them anymore. And we have really got to take it seriously, that we have to do things that might feel avant-garde to those of us who are 137, but probably would feel really natural if you were, you know, younger, receiving messages. So thank you so much to ComNat for the opportunity for us to talk about this. We love talking about this issue, and those of us at CMSI always love talking to Michael Crawford and our Spitfire friends. And of course, we love Zeba Rahman, who speaks like a poet in everything that she does. And so that's just a bonus. Thank you.